They thought they had finally won. Sitting in the plush leather chairs of Marcus Sterling's mahogany-walled office, my 3 children, Julian, Beatrice, and Richard, could barely contain their triumphant smirks. I had spent my entire life building a multi-million-dollar shipping empire, sacrificing my sleep, my sweat, and my own youth to ensure they would never know the sting of poverty. Yet, in my final years, when my body grew frail, but my mind remained as sharp as a forensic accountant's ledger, they treated me like an inconvenient ghost. They plotted behind my back, whispered in dark corners, and drafted legal petitions to declare me incompetent, all in a desperate, greedy rush to snatch my wealth before my heart even stopped beating. They thought I was blind to their betrayal. They thought the old man was simple, weak, and entirely oblivious. Now, dressed in pristine, designer black that cost more than a working man's monthly wage, they sat ready to inherit the empire they did absolutely nothing to build. Julian, my eldest, was already tapping away on his phone, his eyes reflecting the cold glow of a spreadsheet as he calculated his immediate share of the liquidation. He had always valued numbers over blood. Next to him sat Beatrice, adjusting her heavy pearl necklace with a delicate, triumphant flick of her wrist. She was already mentally redecorating the family estate, preparing to host the high society galas she believed she was destined for. Richard, the youngest and most reckless, leaned back with his ankles crossed, a lazy, arrogant grin plastered across his face. To them, my passing was not a tragedy. It was a long overdue payday, a final obstacle cleared. Marcus Sterling, my lifelong friend and trusted attorney, sat behind his heavy oak desk. He adjusted his spectacles, his expression unreadable as he unfolded the thick parchment of my last will and testament. Marcus began to read, his deep, resonant voice echoing in the quiet room. He read the first page, and with every word, my children's smug satisfaction grew. To Julian, I left the primary corporate shares of Vance Shipping. To Beatrice, I bequeathed the historic Bellevue estate and the primary bank accounts. To Richard, I left the secondary investment portfolios. As the words washed over them, they exchanged victorious, knowing glances. Julian let out a soft, breathy laugh, sliding his phone into his pocket. Beatrice squeezed her pearls, her smirk widening into a full, arrogant smile. They had won. The old man had died, and they had successfully secured the crown without a fight. They believed their years of neglect, their cold glares, and their secret schemes had gone completely unpunished. But then, Marcus stopped reading. The silence that followed was sudden and heavy, pressing down on the room like a physical weight. The steady, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner seemed to grow louder, filling the void. Marcus did not fold the paper. Instead, he slowly raised his head, his eyes locking onto my 3 children with a look of profound, chilling gravity. The professional warmth was entirely gone from his face. He cleared his throat, a sharp sound that shattered the quiet. "That is the end of the first page," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a low, deliberate tone. "However, there is a second page." In an instant, the triumphant smiles froze on their faces. The smug warmth in the room vanished, replaced by a sudden icy wave of dread. To understand the cold, calculating greed that froze on my children's faces in that lawyer's office, you have to understand how we got here, and how the very foundations of our family turned to sand. Long before I was the formidable head of Vance Logistics, I was just a young man with dirt under my fingernails and a fire in my belly. I spent my youth doing backbreaking labor in the damp, unforgiving shipyards of the harbor. I built this multi-million-dollar shipping empire with nothing but my bare hands and a single rusted barge. My late wife, Martha, was my anchor through those lean years. She was a woman of absolute modesty, who could stretch a single dollar to feed us for a week and still find a way to smile. We wore patched clothes, lived in a drafty apartment near the docks, and dreamed of a future where our children would never have to know the biting chill of poverty. But wealth, as I would painfully learn, is a peculiar kind of rot. When the money finally started flowing, Martha and I made the fatal mistake of trying to shield our children from the very hardships that had forged our strength. We gave them everything we never had, hoping it would make their lives beautiful. Instead, it made them soft, and worse, it made them arrogant. As the years rolled on, the gratitude we hoped for vanished, replaced by an insatiable, ugly sense of entitlement. Julian was the first to show the cracks. He fancied himself a brilliant entrepreneur, a visionary destined for the cover of business magazines. But he lacked the grit to actually build anything. I watched him throw millions of my hard-earned dollars into flashy, ill-conceived tech startups that collapsed within months. He never apologized for the losses, nor did he ever thank me. To Julian, my wealth was simply a limitless safety net, a plaything for his fragile ego. Then there was Beatrice. She craved the validation of high society, desperately trying to scrub away any trace of her working-class heritage. I will never forget the night of her charity gala. I wore my best suit, but my hands, scarred and permanently stained with the grease of the shipyards, gave me away. When one of her wealthy socialite friends asked what I did, Beatrice quickly stepped in, her face flushing with deep embarrassment. She laughed nervously and told them I was just a retired subcontractor who kept to himself. She was ashamed of the very hands that had paid for her designer gown and her expensive Ivy League education. And Richard, my youngest, was perhaps the most ruthless of all. He spent his days racing luxury sports cars and demanding larger allowances, completely blind to the toll his lifestyle took on my business. During my final years, as my heart began to fail and I secretly battled a terminal condition, Richard's only concern was whether my illness would affect his trust fund. I remember sitting in my study, clutching my chest in agony, while Richard barged in to complain that his monthly stipend was late. They stopped asking how I was feeling. They stopped visiting unless they needed a check signed. They began to view me not as a father who loved them unconditionally, but as a biological ATM with an expiration date. The true depth of a person's greed is rarely revealed in the light. It crawls out from the shadows when they think no one is watching. For me, that chilling revelation came on Thanksgiving, a day meant for family, but which instead became the absolute turning point of my life. I was supposed to be resting in my bedroom, worn down by the physical frailty that had begun to creep into my bones, but while my body was weak, my mind remained as sharp as a forensic accountant's ledger. Needing a glass of water, I walked slowly down the hallway, my soft slippers making no sound. As I approached my study, I heard them. It was a hushed, urgent conversation, punctuated by sharp, conspiratorial whispers that made me freeze. Julian was speaking, his voice cold and completely devoid of warmth. He was explaining to the others that my physical decline was taking far too long, stating that the shipping business was stagnating under my conservative management and they could not afford to wait for nature to take its course. Then Beatrice chimed in, her tone dripping with a calculated malice that cut deeper than any blade. She spoke of a certain Dr. Hatcher, a compromised physician with a reputation for signing whatever documents his wealthy clients paid him to sign. She said Hatcher had already agreed, for a substantial fee, to draft a medical evaluation declaring me mentally incompetent, claiming I suffered from advanced dementia. Richard laughed, a low, ugly sound, and muttered that once the paperwork was filed, they could easily lock me away in a cheap, understaffed care facility on the outskirts of the city, safely out of sight, while they liquidated my life's work. Standing in that dark hallway, clutching my chest, I felt a profound chill settle into my soul. They did not just lack love for the man who had sacrificed his youth to build their comfortable lives. They lacked basic human decency. They wanted to strip me of my dignity, my freedom, and my legacy, burying me alive in a concrete tomb just to accelerate their inheritance. In that moment of absolute betrayal, something shifted inside me. The weeping, broken father died, and the ruthless, self-made industrialist took his place. Anger is a useless emotion. It clouds judgment. I needed clarity. I possessed a background in forensic accounting and a lifetime of outmaneuvering cutthroat competitors. My children had declared war, and I was going to wage it on my own terms. I quietly slipped back to my room, my heart beating with a cold, steady resolve. I decided then and there to play the exact role they expected of me. I would become the helpless, senile old man they desperately wanted to see. The very next morning I began my performance. I let my hands tremble slightly when I poured my morning tea, purposely spilling a few drops on the polished table. I pretended to forget their names occasionally, staring blankly into space while they smirked at each other. But behind my vacant eyes, I was working. I installed hidden recording devices in my study, capturing every whisper of their plotting. I tracked their bank accounts, documenting every unauthorized transfer and every interaction with Dr. Hatcher. I was meticulously building an airtight legal trap, and my children were happily walking right into it. Marcus sat across from me, his eyes studying the thick stack of financial ledgers I had spread across his mahogany desk. For a long moment, there was only the sound of his heavy breathing and the steady rustling of legal documents as he turned page after page. When he finally looked up, he let out a choked laugh, a mixture of disbelief and profound respect. He asked me if I was absolutely certain about this. I looked him dead in the eye and told him that my children had already buried me in their minds, so it was only fair that I chose how my ghost would haunt them. Over the next several weeks, Marcus and I worked like thieves in the night, systematically dismantling the massive empire I spent 50 years building, transforming it into a beautiful legal labyrinth. My children believed they were master chess players, but they were playing against a man who had built the board. First, I targeted my true liquid assets. I quietly liquidated my personal investment portfolios, my offshore reserves, and the cash reserves of my secondary holdings. Millions of dollars were silently transferred into an untouchable, ironclad offshore charitable trust based in the Cook Islands, designated to fund scholarships for the children of shipyard workers. The trustees were independent, completely insulated from any legal challenge my children could ever mount. That money, the true fruit of my life's labor, was gone from their reach forever. But a simple disinheritance was not enough. To truly teach them the cost of their greed, I had to let them think they had won. I left the historic Bellevue estate and the primary domestic corporate accounts of Vance Shipping seemingly intact. To the untrained eye, they looked like the crown jewels of my legacy. But behind the glossy facade lay a financial landmine. Years ago, when Julian's shipping subsidiary was on the verge of a humiliating collapse, I had quietly stepped in to save his reputation. I absorbed his massive unresolved debts, amounting to tens of millions of dollars, into the primary domestic corporate accounts, keeping them dormant under my personal supervision. Now, I systematically restructured those accounts. I uncoupled my personal guarantees and tied those crushing, toxic liabilities directly to the corporate shares and the Bellevue estate itself. Finally, we drafted the instrument of their undoing, a 2-page last will and testament. The first page was a masterfully crafted decoy. It was designed to feed their insatiable vanity, giving Julian the corporate shares, Beatrice the estate, and Richard the remaining domestic portfolios. It was the perfect cheese in the trap, guaranteed to make them smile, to make them let down their guard, and to make them expose their true ugly colors in front of Marcus and the court. But then came the second page. That was where the trap would spring. It would reveal that the assets they so eagerly claimed were nothing but hollow shells, loaded with ruinous debt that they would now be personally liable for as the new directors and owners. The second page was the hammer blow that would strip them of their stolen luxury and force them to face the harsh reality of the working-class life they had so deeply despised. I signed the documents with a steady hand, feeling a cold, calm peace wash over me. The trap was set, and the vultures were already circling. There is a unique, suffocating kind of silence that settles into a house when you realize you have been completely erased by the very people you gave life to. In those final months, as my body betrayed me and my heart struggled to maintain its steady rhythm, the Bellevue estate became my gilded cage. My children did not just stop visiting. They treated my remaining days as an inconvenient delay. The grand hallways that once echoed with their childhood laughter were now empty, filled only with the dust of forgotten memories. Julian, Beatrice, and Richard had entirely vanished from my physical world. They no longer called to ask how I was breathing, or if the pain in my chest had subsided. Instead, my relationship with my own flesh and blood was reduced to cold, automated emails sent by their lawyers demanding my digital signature on financial documents. Every notification on my tablet was a fresh dagger, a digital demand to strip away the last of my sovereignty before my body was even cold. They did not want my love. They only wanted my consent to plunder what was left. Outside, the autumn bled into the coldest winter I had ever known. The rain beat relentlessly against the tall glass windows of my study, and the low, ominous rumble of thunder rolled across the harbor, shaking the very foundations of Bellevue. I sat in my armchair, wrapped in a heavy blanket that offered no real warmth. I could feel the physical sensation of my strength slipping away, like sand running through the fingers of a tired man. My hands, once capable of lifting heavy iron cables in the shipyards, were now pale and trembling. My breath came in shallow, labored gasps, yet beneath this fragile, failing exterior, a quiet, formidable resolve burned brighter than ever. My mind was still the mind of the master architect. I was not afraid of the dark valley ahead, because I knew every stone of the path I had laid out for my children. Their neglect was painful, but it was also the final, irrefutable evidence I needed to steel my heart. One storm-swept evening, with the thunder cracking directly overhead, I dragged myself to my desk. I turned on my computer and recorded a final video message. I looked directly into the camera lens, my voice weak, but my eyes filled with an unshakable authority. I spoke to them not as a victim, but as their father and their judge. I explained the trap, the crushing debt, and the true destination of my wealth. I saved the video onto an encrypted drive, a piece of plastic that held the ultimate moral lesson they so desperately needed. When Marcus made his final secret visit under the cover of night, I slipped the drive into his hand. His grip was tight, his eyes filled with a heavy, somber understanding. He promised that the second page would be read exactly as planned, with no mercy. A few nights later, the freezing storm finally passed, leaving behind a crisp, silent dark. I lay in my warm bed, looking out at the cold, distant harbor lights where my empire had begun so many decades ago. I felt no fear, only a profound, beautiful peace. I closed my eyes, slipping quietly into the eternal sleep, entirely alone, but with the peace of a man who knows justice is about to be served. The frozen smiles on my children's faces were a sight I had long anticipated, a masterpiece of poetic justice painted in real time. In the heavy, suffocating silence of Marcus Sterling's office, the triumph that had radiated from Julian, Beatrice, and Richard only moments ago evaporated, replaced by a cold, rising panic. They stared at Marcus, their breathing suddenly shallow, their postures stiffening. Julian's fingers hovered over his phone, his thumb trembling against the screen. Beatrice slowly lowered her hand from her pearl necklace, her eyes widening as she tried to decode the sudden gravity in the lawyer's face. Richard chuckled nervously, a weak, hollow sound that died instantly in the quiet room. With a slow, deliberate movement, Marcus turned the first page over, revealing the crisp white sheet beneath it. He cleared his throat, and the sound was like a gavel striking a block in a silent courtroom. He began to read, his voice steady, clinical, and completely devoid of warmth. "All assets listed on page 1, Marcus read, his voice echoing off the mahogany walls, are indeed bequeathed to Julian, Beatrice, and Richard. However, these assets are legally and irreversibly tied to the outstanding liabilities of Vance Logistics subsidiary debts, totaling $40 million, which the beneficiaries must personally and jointly assume immediately upon acceptance of the inheritance." A sharp, collective gasp shattered the room. Julian stood up so fast, his leather chair screeched against the hardwood floor, his face turning a sickly, ghostly pale. He stammered, shaking his head in wild denial, shouting that this was impossible, that Vance Shipping was a multi-million-dollar empire. Beatrice clutched her head, her manicured nails digging into her scalp as she stared at the desk in absolute horror. $40 million of personal liability meant total, unmitigated ruin. It meant the beloved Bellevue estate would be seized by hungry creditors, their personal bank accounts frozen, and their luxurious, high society lifestyles completely dismantled piece by piece before their very eyes. Richard's lazy, arrogant grin was completely gone, replaced by a wide-eyed, sweating terror that made his expensive designer collar feel like a noose. He looked at his siblings, begging them to tell him this was a mistake, that they could just reject the inheritance and walk away clean. But Marcus raised his hand, silencing their frantic protests with a single, commanding gesture. He turned back to the paper to read the final, devastating blow. "The true, unencumbered liquid wealth of my estate," Marcus continued, his eyes locking onto my terrified children, amounting to $80 million, has been permanently transferred to the Vance Foundation for Underprivileged Youth. It is held in an untouchable, offshore charitable trust, completely insulated from any legal challenge. The room seemed to lose all its air. $80 million, the true fruit of my life's labor, was gone from their reach forever. Marcus looked at them one last time, reading my final personal message written at the bottom of the page. "You wanted my legacy without my labor," Marcus read, his voice carrying the quiet, formidable strength of my own spirit. "Now you have my debts without my wealth." My children sat in stunned, defeated silence, the crushing weight of their own greed collapsing upon them. They had spent years plotting to declare me incompetent to steal my fortune, and now they were left holding a $40 million tomb of their own making. Their frantic cries and desperate denials filled the room, but Marcus did not offer them a single word of comfort. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a small black remote, and pointed it toward the mahogany wall cabinet. With a soft click, the wooden panels slid apart to reveal a large television screen. My children stopped shouting, their tear-stained faces turning toward the dark glass as it flickered to life. It was me. But I did not look like the frail, bedridden old man they had spent the last 2 years ignoring. I sat in my favorite leather armchair, looking healthy, robust, and entirely at peace. My eyes, sharp and clear, looked directly into the camera, staring right back at them across the barrier of death. When I began to speak, my voice was the deep, resonant baritone of the father they had once feared and respected, filled with a warm but powerful authority. "Hello, Julian. Hello, Beatrice. Hello, Richard," my voice said from the screen, a faint, sad smile touching my lips. "If you are watching this, you are currently feeling the cold weight of the reality you have built for yourselves. You are likely angry, feeling betrayed by the father who spent his entire life trying to shield you from the harshness of this world. But I did not write this will to punish you. I wrote it to save you from the slow, poisonous rot of your own entitlement. I watched you grow from beautiful, innocent children into adults who valued paper over people and luxury over love. I realized too late that by giving you everything, I had taught you nothing. Wealth is not a privilege of birth, nor is it a weapon to look down on those who sweat and bleed for their daily bread. It is a profound responsibility, one that must be earned through humility, sacrifice, and honest labor. You now face a choice, and you have exactly 30 days to make it. You can choose to reject the inheritance entirely. If you do, you will face immediate bankruptcy, losing your luxury cars, your designer clothes, and your lavish lifestyles. You will start from absolute zero, with nothing but your own 2 hands to support yourselves, just as I did in the muddy shipyards 50 years ago. Or you can accept the inheritance and the $40 million of debt tied to it. You will spend your lives working, managing the cargo, and sweating over the balance sheets. Every single penny of profit will go toward paying off those liabilities. You will live as working-class managers, earning a modest salary, finally learning what it means to work a 12-hour day to keep a roof over your head. Julian buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with heavy sobs. Beatrice sat frozen, tears ruining her expensive makeup, her pride completely shattered. Richard looked down at his polished shoes, the arrogance entirely drained from his face, replaced by a quiet, dawning understanding. I leaned forward in the video, my expression softening with a profound paternal tenderness. "I gave you my love, and you wanted my money," my voice whispered, echoing off the high ceiling of the office. "Now, I give you my work, so you may finally find your souls. Choose wisely, my children." The screen faded to black, leaving them in a deep, absolute silence.